Hey guys, I am Dr. Kim Sage. Welcome to my YouTube channel. And today's video is really going to be doing some deep dives into this book, but also using this book to talk about other issues related to what we often describe as emotionally immature parents in terms of how these examples relate to disorders like narcissistic personality disorder, borderline PD, and other types of difficulties that can really impact our parenting. So if you're new here, please feel free to subscribe and click the bell, and that way you'll be notified when I post new videos. I also post every day, at least once, if not more, on TikTok, and so I hope you'll follow me there at Dr. Kim Sage. Okay, so what I want to do today is just go through this checklist on assessing your parents' emotional immaturity, and you can find a copy of this. I'll link down below online, and you can also, of course, find it in this book. But my only issue with this book, which I love, is that many of the qualities that are described as emotionally immature in a certain pattern really do go with larger disorders. And so while I use the word wounded a lot, there are scenarios where I think it's important to understand that the larger issue is a PD in a way that, you know, explains, well, why was a parent so much like this towards me and how has it affected me? Because understanding that your parent was a narcissist or a parent who struggled with borderline often explains a lot of confusing things. For example, let's say in narcissism, it may explain why your parent lacked empathy, why you always felt like you were an extension of them, and why you were so driven to compete and competitive yourself, or why you felt jealous of a sibling who seemed to get all of the light. Or, for example, why with a borderline parent, why you may have felt, why you may still feel a very strong mix of potentially love and hate towards them, because there are times when you felt so seen and connected to your borderline parent, and times where you felt destroyed and hated, or that you were the worst person ever. And that is what unfortunately goes with these behaviors, is that regardless of immaturity or, you know, PDs, there's often a sense that something is wrong with us because children are egocentric, and we believe that if a parent sees us as selfish, spoiled, bad, not good, perfect, whatever, we're going to believe the negative things the most, right? That's how our brains are wired. We are wired to focus on negative information to keep us safe and alive and critical thinkers. But unfortunately, that often resonates from a deeper place. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through this checklist, as I said, and quickly discuss how acknowledging those things, if they're true for you, might affect you. And this might be a part 1 and 2, depending upon how long it goes. And then I'm going to go into, in future videos, how these qualities, whether they are immaturity or being wounded or narcissism or borderline, can affect different parts of our lives, different relational issues, how we see ourselves, and those types of things. Okay, so let's get started. The first one that we would check says, my parents often overreacted to relatively minor things. So what that often leads to is walking on eggshells, is to having a parent who you were at some level afraid of, who you had to be hyper vigilant about, because if they're overreacting, that usually means they're highly emotional, they're highly angry, they're judgmental, they're sensitive, whatever. And so you have to start to shape your responses to their behavior. And so you might hold back information, you might lie about things, you might walk around often very anxious, or you could be very depressed, knowing that if the slightest thing upset them, they were going to go off into their own depression, which was then going to affect your ability to get your needs met. But really, overreactivity from a parent can truly create lots of anxiety in us, because we can't predict what's going to happen. We just know that there's a good chance we won't be safe, psychologically, physically, emotionally. The next one is, my parents didn't express much empathy or emotional awareness. And that often goes into a more avoidance style, meaning that we don't get really mirrored or seen. It can also go into frankly disorganized and anxious too, in that emotionally we don't feel attuned to or safe or seen. And then if we don't have empathy from them, we often feel this sort of vacant sense of self. We can feel lonely. We can feel, really lack the roots of understanding what emotional intimacy looks like, that reciprocity of being emotional with somebody and feeling safe. The next one is, when it came to emotional closeness and feelings, my parent seemed uncomfortable and didn't go there. And so what we're learning, if that's the case, is that we don't learn the emotional language of relationships and like reciprocity, right? We learn to suppress and stuff our emotions and hide our emotions because there's no place or safety for us to have them. The next one is, my parent was often irritated by individual differences or points of view, meaning that there's no room for you to be a separate person. And that can fall into a more narcissistic dynamic where, if you don't see it their way, then you don't matter, or your opinion is stupid or irrelevant or immature or lacking knowledge. And so there's no place for you to develop a separate sense of self and then to be seen and valued for that. So you might reflect back what you think they want from you. You might develop really a fake persona of who you think you're supposed to be. And you may even have difficulty connecting to who you really are because there was no room for you to develop your own sense of self. The next one is, when I was growing up, my parent used me as a confidant, but was not a confidant for me. And that really goes to what I've talked about, being overly involved in the parent's state of mind, making you their emotional partner or best friend, which can happen in both borderline and narcissism. In some way, the parent is using you as an emotional partner, not using you necessarily in that negative way it sounds, although it could be if it's a very sort of unhealthy dynamic in terms of a very self-focused parent. It also could just be a parent that has no understanding of the fact that they're doing that, right? They're oversharing their emotional problems. This would be a parent who overshared their sex life or their dating relationships or how they feel about your other parent. So there would just be this idea that you exist to meet the parent's emotional needs, but you don't really get that from a parent. And it shouldn't even be both ways. For the most part, it should be your parent meeting your needs. Now, we're not robots, so we're going to sometimes overshare, or we're going to say too much, or we're going to struggle, and kids are going to see it. But the goal should be to be there for the child. The next one is, my parent often said and did things without thinking about people's feelings. And so what does that teach us, right? That teaches us that we shouldn't be empathic. We shouldn't be sensitive to others' beliefs or ideas. And also, what about our own, right? That our own don't matter. And so that creates a foundation for lacking empathy and sensitivity and respect for other cultures, other beliefs, and certainly for our own selves from our parents. The next one is, I didn't get much attention or sympathy from my parent, except when maybe I was really sick. And so walking around feeling like you don't matter is going to have a significant impact on how you see yourself and value in the world. And if you only got validated or seen when you were sick, it could clearly often reinforce that you need to be sick to be seen. Increase health anxiety, and that, only when you're sick do you matter. So that's an issue there. The next one is, my parent was inconsistent, sometimes wise, sometimes unreasonable. And that kind of goes back often to disorganized and anxious attachment, where you just never know what you're going to get. And so it feels very much, it's hard to read. It could create a lot of anxiety. And sometimes this parent is wise, what we're saying here, and safe, and they can kind of contain you. And other times, they don't see you at all. In fact, maybe they're wounding in how they respond to you and invalidating. The next one is, if I became upset, my parent either said something superficial and unhelpful or got angry and sarcastic. So if you think about that, right, there's no room for you to know, once again, what you're going to get. And at the core, you're not being mirrored and attuned to and seen. And it's another one of those eggshell situations where you never know what you're going to get. And so that can, really create difficulty navigating our own emotions. It can create a lot of anxiety and hypervigilance. It can create a shutdown where we just don't want to share what we feel because we never know what we're going to get. It's never safe. And that can lead to, as I'm saying, a bunch of other mental health issues. And also, sarcasm is its own kind of abuse and anger, right? It's a mocking and a minimizing and invalidating that can be very hurtful to a child's sense of self. The next one is conversations mostly centered on my parents' interests. Once again, we're kind of back to that more narcissistic thing where it's like, only if it's about them is it worthy and does it matter. And it forces a child to engage in adult conversations and adult topics and to maybe act as an emotional partner or support system long before you should and when you never should in the first place. And it also says that what you feel, what you like, and who you are don't matter. The next one is even polite disagreement could make my parent very defensive, meaning that you don't get to have an opinion because it's unsafe. If a parent gets defensive, if they push back, if they're angry, if they're not able to be reciprocal, and really back to that co-regulation where it's a safe interchange, it's going to create a problem in terms of how we express ourselves, how we see ourselves, and how we feel safe in those relationships. The next one is, it was deflating to tell my parent about my success because it didn't seem to matter. And that often goes with a very narcissistic dynamic where it just feels like down to even have any success because they're not going to see it, they're not going to recognize it or honor it, they might make it about themselves. And so a person might learn that, well, either A, I don't even want to bother trying to be successful, or when I am successful, I have to always keep it to myself. I can't share it with someone. It can really deter us from being driven to be valued and seen and to do well in something for ourselves. Because, when we're little, if the parent doesn't see it, it didn't happen. We want to feel cherished and adored and really that our parents are in awe of who we are and that they light up when we come in the room, right? That they see us as someone who matters. And so all of that can really affect our sense of self. The next one is facts and logic were no match for my parents' opinions. This kind of goes to what we're dealing with now in some ways. It's that things that were the truth were not seen. It was only from the parents' lens. If they believed something or saw something, regardless of what the truth was or facts or logic or what made sense, it was irrelevant. We were minimized, we weren't seen, and so we learn to maybe believe what they believe on the outside and present that false self. We learn to not express our true feelings. We might avoid facts and logic ourselves because the model was those things don't matter, only belief systems matter. And of course there's a place for that, but that doesn't necessarily lend itself to the universal truth of the world if we're just going through life with only our opinions and not taking into account critical thinking skills and other information and things like that. And it can affect all of us as we've learned. The next part is my parent wasn't self-reflective and rarely looked at his or her role in a problem. So what does that say? That says that the parent is faultless, right? That they don't know how to teach a child how to look at themselves and their behavior. We know that having insight is fundamental to change and to therapy even. If we can't say, yeah, you know what, I don't like how I handled that and I kind of want to work on that and be different, we can't change. And so if we're not taught that or modeled that we can't change, we often see parents who act this way who are very narcissistic and can't see us and therefore can't meet our needs and help become close to us. It's not great for relationships and relationship building, not only with ourselves, but with others, and certainly with that parent. You can't make repairs or do healing if the parent can't even acknowledge that something happened that was upsetting or bothersome or worthy of change. The next one is my parent tended to be a black and white thinker and was unreceptive to new ideas. And that kind of circles back to what I said, is that there's no room for anyone else's opinion or gray area. And I do believe that most of life is in the gray area. It's like even, severe events that happen in our lives, if we unpack all that led to them, it's hard to say absolutely everything is one thing or another. I always use So the important issue with this little exercise from this book is to go through and how many of those did you endorse and say yes to? Clearly, the more you check off and endorse, the more it means you may have been impacted by a parent who was struggling with being emotionally available and present and really attuning to you. And as I've said, whether it's from immaturity all the way up the spectrum to different disorders, it's important to understand, because I think that it takes the blame off ourselves, because we often arrive at life, if we don't know these things, thinking that we are bad, we are not worthy, we don't deserve empathy, or we don't know how to provide empathy, or to be, critical thinkers, because we haven't been exposed to those things. And so it all impacts where we are today, how we feel about ourselves, how we function, and all of those things. So I hope that was helpful. I will start going into further detail in the next few videos. Please feel free to leave your comments and thoughts. And like I said, don't forget to subscribe and click the bell. Please stay safe and well, and I'll see you next time. Bye, guys.